Good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Hopefully everyone is doing well. Hopefully everyone's families are doing well with all of the pandemic, with everything that's going on in our world. We're dealing with our protest. We're dealing with various things in our various communities, dealing with our families, trying to see what are we doing to engage with each other and basically improve our communities. As we're thinking about things that we're dealing with our communities, one of the things that we often deal with is how is law enforcement dealing with our community? How is education dealing with our community? What's going on in law enforcement? If you've noticed, we're having a lot of things that are happening, and it is involving the law enforcement community. Glad to have you join us, Mr. Boyer, over there at the Institute of Public Safety at Broward College, that teaches our law enforcement officers what it is that we need to do out there in the community and how we actually serve our community. Because as many of us know, law enforcement is a calling. And as we are learning more and more, we are being able to identify individuals that are wearing the badge but do not deserve to be wearing the badge. And when those individuals do things that tarnish the badge and tarnish the relationships that we've been building with the community, then that causes the community to wonder, what do we have to do to eliminate those issues? Some of those things that we've talked about with eliminating the issues, we've been the body worn cameras. We've talked about accountability. We've talked about transparency. We've talked about all types of things. We've gone through different philosophies with law enforcement. We've gone through community-oriented policing. We've gone through problem-oriented policing. We've had various initiatives with various police departments that we've put on. We've talked about diversity within police department. We've talked about how do we staff our agencies. And the latest subject that we're dealing with right now is the defunding of police departments. And that is a very interesting term. And I noticed that a lot of times when we're saying things, words have power. And a lot of times the terminology that we use when we are dealing with issues can determine whether or not we pull people together or we further polarize our communities. And I believe that if you look at what's happening with us currently, we don't need many other things that are polarizing our communities. We need to come together to realize that we're all here living in the same community together. And we must learn what is it that all of us want that we can agree on, because while we tend to focus on all of our differences, I believe that if we focus more on our commonalities, we will get a lot further. So a lot of times when you look at it, I have not met anyone that would, one, not like their kids to live in a better place than they do. Two, individual where they'd like to have a nice home and be comfortable and safe in their home. And three, to be able to just live the American dream however they define it. So with that in mind, I am Dr. Gregory Salters, and I'm going to be talking to you tonight about defunding the police department, or actually defunding. My background, I've worked in law enforcement for over 27 years. I've been in executive level positions for over 10 of those years and been in supervisory positions for the most of my time in law enforcement. I've had the pleasure of being on the FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement team, teaching first line supervisors. I've had the pleasure of teaching out of the Institute of Public Safety in Broward County and Miami-Dade. And so I have also been in command and worked with many budgets within the police department. So I come from my experiences coming through and some of the things I've seen, some of the things I've talked with other agencies about. So those are what we're going to be doing. And I'm looking forward to having some comments that individuals have. I'm looking forward to having your questions so that perhaps we can have a little bit better understanding of what's actually happening with the finances within law enforcement agencies. So one, let's jump into this. Defunding the police department. Let's see, how did that actually come about? It came about when individuals were wondering what they could do with the police department when things were not going as well as they'd like, when you were having a lot of the things where black males had been mistreated and or killed at the hands of law enforcement, and people saying, wow, how do we stop this? And most recently, we had the incident up in Minnesota when now they're looking at disbanding the police department. One thing that I'll caution individuals on is like someone said long years ago, one size fits all does not fit all. Where there may be some agencies where defunding means totally getting rid of the agency, which could be for any numerous reasons. And at other agencies, it basically means defunding is what I look at as a reallocation of resources. And I've been in law enforcement, as I stated, 27 years. And as I've been here, I have seen the funding of various programs go away, some come back. And a lot of that is what we're looking at with our budgets. And it's kind of interesting because we talk about our budgets and we talk about our funding, but do we actually understand how our police departments are funded? Largely, these police departments are funded by taxes, the government's taxes, and also you can get taxes from perhaps your sales taxes, your revenue taxes, hotel bed taxes, and everything else is what we deal with. So now with this pandemic, imagine what is happening to your municipal government, your county government, state, and federal level when a lot of the taxes that we would be receiving did not come in. So that is creating a budget crunch on many organizations. With that budget crunch, we only have limited resources. And if I will, I'll use the budget for a police department similar to a budget of your home. So if you have a budget for your home, and let's suppose that you have budgeted X amount of dollars towards your mortgage or your rent, and you have overspent the money. You have gone over there and you have done so much entertaining. So basically, you have reallocated your money, and now you do not have enough to cover your mortgage or rent. You didn't defund your budget. You basically reallocated those funds. So in the police department stance, what you'll find is sometimes individuals are not defunding the police department, but what they're doing are reallocating those funds. With some of the models and discussions that are out, people are saying, do not give the police department so many funds. We would like to give it to social services to better serve our community and the needs that they have. I am all for funding things in the community. I am all for doing things to reduce the school to prison pipeline. I'm all for reducing the number of negative contacts or the percentage of negative contacts that the public may have with the police department. But we also must understand that whether it is the police department or whether it is education, social services, or whatever else you have out there, how do you really do that? Is that a defunding or reallocation of funds in the police department? Or does this take the city administrators and the elected officials to look at all of the budgets within their purvey, within their auspices or under their command to determine where do we actually need to reallocate or defund these positions? But now let's get back to one thing. What is it and how do we get our funds? One thing, your funds are based on your census. Many of us at this time are looking at those 2020 census. Many people are not filling them out. If you look at the percentages, we are across the nation, we might be at about 50% in completion rate if you look across the nation. So can you imagine if your paycheck when you went to get it was 50% of what you normally would have gotten? How would you survive that particular time? So if you're listening to this, if you have shared it, if you're telling other people, tell them to complete the census. Because one, if you complete the census, that will make sure you get the amount of funds that are allocated appropriately for your geographic area. Now, once you get those funds for your geographic area, you have to make sure that you have elected. That means you must be a registered voter and you must be an educated voter to elect officials that will be that understand their fiduciary or their responsibility of your money and understand how to look at the citizens, look at the communities, and determine how those limited resources will be allocated. Sometimes those people that you elect will be making those decisions in your best interest, and sometimes they may need your input. Because remember, they don't make the best decisions and do a defunding or reallocation of funds based on their community. They do a defunding or reallocation based on the portion of the community that is engaged and connected with them and expressing their will to them. So if you're in the community, but you are not connected to or engaging with your elected officials, they do not even know what it is that you would like to have them address. So you must be engaged. And that's one of the things that I've had some discussions with people in the community, and some of the individuals that I've had discussions within the community have very valid points. They would like to know what's happening with the funds. And it's very interesting is that with the police departments, their financial records are public. When is the last time that you have attended your city commission meeting, your county commission meeting, and really looked at their budget numbers to see exactly what it is? Because I've talked to individuals, they've had the opportunity, they haven't met with their budget advisory boards. You can have input on those particular things. Because just because they're defunding and getting rid of the police department in Minnesota, what do they have that will come in play and take the role of law enforcement? When you say different models of public safety, I'm all for the different models of public safety. When you look at my career, I came up through the community oriented policing and the less than funded side of many police departments. I was in bike patrol. I did that. I was out there on bike patrol in the community. That's out there in the community, dealing with them, learning about the community, and really being a part of the community. Then they're taught DARE. So DARE, Drug Abuse Resistance Education. How many of you all remember that program? And that was taught in fifth grade, the exit grade of elementary school, because at that point we realized the importance of touching base with those kids at that really tender age and that really informative age. And what I really loved about the DARE program is that when I taught the fifth graders, I was in the elementary school, so you dealt with the kids from kindergarten up to fifth grade or sixth grade, depending on the school. But you also got a chance to know their parents. You got a chance to know their relatives. You were there because of the schools. Everybody zoned there. You knew everybody in the school. The individuals that I taught there to now are 32, 33 years old. I see them out there in the community, and those relationships that were established back in the early to the mid to late 90s still exist to this day. But what happened? There was a grant funded position. So now when the grant ran out, many police departments did not have the funding to continue the DARE program. And if you look at the research and you Google DARE, some people said it wasn't successful. Some people says it was successful. So who do you believe? Talk to individuals that went through the DARE program. That you can say the DARE program was effectively defunded. So was it defunded or were the funds reallocated? Realizing that it was largely funded based on grants with many organizations, it was defunded. Then when we look at the other program that came out dealing with kids, it was the GREAT program. That was gang resistance education and training. That was another grant funded program, but it had its curriculum largely focused in the middle schools. So now you find it to where we've lost that funding for the GREAT program. We looked over to the GREAT program, what those things were doing. And so now, are those reallocations or are those defundings? Even right now, you'll find out where there are a number of jobs in the police department that police officers do that, quite frankly, we look at and we say those jobs can be handled by a civilian employee. You do not need someone with a gun to do those types of jobs. So many agencies have gone out there and started reallocating those funds to better resources to better serve the community. But how are they knowing to do that? Because of the portion of the community that is engaged in the process and making their thoughts and wishes known. They say we might not want so many cops doing whatever. We may need some more cops in our community unit. But then we have to look at it. How many cops really want to work in the community unit or the community building unit if in fact that isn't where your promotions are coming from? If you look at the promotions and the positions and the resumes of individuals in top law enforcement positions, you'll find out that many of them come from a tactical or an investigative background. So just as you do in any career field, you look at who's at the top, you see what they did to get there, and you begin thinking about career succession and saying that, gee, if I want to be in this position and I look at the individuals that have gotten there, I must do X, Y, and Z. If it does not appear as though the positions in community-oriented policing or the positions that are building the community are as favored or as warranted or as coveted, or people are not being promoted out of those positions, there's less incentive for you to be in those positions. So then again, when you start looking at the budgets, who determines how the police department budget is allocated? Your leadership. So if your leadership, it was one time that I was working from one and I saw the issue where the chief may have come from a SWAT background, special weapons and tactics. So therefore, anytime you're in a discussion and you have X number of dollars, do you spend it for SWAT or do you spend it for community-oriented policing? Based on his or her unconscious bias towards the things that they've gone through, the funding will go towards those particular units. Oh, I see. Okay, I see. Lieutenant Hunter, you mentioned the Weed and Seed program. Yes, indeed. When you had the Weed and Seed program that was out here, and we were doing things where we were attacking the weed and seed and putting in place programs in the community, those things have not no longer been there. So we have had a lot of programs that have been in the community that have been defunded. But right now, what I believe has caused the big discussion on the defunding of the policing is the fact they talk about the militarization of law enforcement. They talk about the weaponry that we have in law enforcement. A lot of times, what you should do is connect with your various municipalities and see exactly how are they purchasing these weapons. How is it that they're making a decision to purchase them? Because with the protests that are going on, I've had the pleasure of, I have worked some of them. I've been an incident commander at some of these, and we've had officers from other agencies respond to assist us. And the level of preparation or the level of equipment that some departments have is less than what some others have. So now, does that mean their agency is defunded, or does it look at where their agency had to make a decision between buying X and Y? And based on what was going on in their particular city, they did not buy riot gear. They did not buy the protective equipment and this type of thing. So now when this situation occurs, they do not have it. So sometimes they look at it and the officers will say, we've been underfunded. We were not provided what we needed to go into and serve our community. Where others are like, well, we never thought that we would get to this point. That's another decision that will be made by each individual municipality as to how they wish to spend their resources. And it's kind of like right now with the protests going on, every municipality where there is a protest going on and law enforcement officers are having to respond to be out there for the safety and the security of the individuals that are doing their protests and their walks, that's costing millions of dollars. So now when you look at the millions of dollars that that is costing, where is that coming from? It's coming from our city coffers, and it's coming from our county coffers. It's coming from federal government. And again, when you talk about how are we funding things, have we looked at our law enforcement trust fund? There's certain things that the law enforcement trust fund can purchase to assist agencies to be prepared to serve their community. Have we looked at those? Because when you talk about our defunding, we talk about our budgeting, we talk about where our staffing needs are. Right now, if you look at it, the largest portion of most cities will be their public service, police and fire. Those take up a large portion of municipalities' budgets. And within the police and fire departments, you'll find out some of the largest portion of their budget is salary expenses. So we do have the other items that are out there, but when a lot of times the equipment is purchased, you'll find that they're being purchased by grants. You find that they're being purchased as piggybacking onto other types of purchases from other agencies. You'll also find out that some are being purchased by surplus. And again, that's not all of them. And that's why I'm telling you, my purpose is for us to kind of have a little bit of knowledge so that we can go into our respective police departments, our respective communities. We can engage them, ask the appropriate questions so that you can find out exactly what it is that your particular jurisdiction is doing. Because I tell you, I've spoken with some individuals just earlier today, and we were talking about what is it to defund the police and what happens. And even when I was speaking with some other individuals the other evening, we were talking about where will those funds go. And it's kind of like sometimes when they talk about getting into the community, we look at it, is our agency a community-oriented policing agency, or do we have community-oriented programs within the agency? There is a big difference. And those are some of the things that we talk about, because if you just have a program that's set aside for community engagement with units and it hasn't really fully gone throughout your organization, that could be causing some problems when you're talking about funding. Also, when you talk about your police departments and how they're actually being run, have you ever noticed how individuals are evaluated? Basic thing in law enforcement and basic thing in life. However you evaluate someone and whatever they know that you're looking for, that's what they will do to obtain what it is that you're dealing with. Many times in law enforcement, we are dealing with moving forward with community oriented policing. We're looking forward to moving into communities and making things happen. But we are evaluating our officers many times on a traditional policing model. So if you are evaluating me based on arrest or evaluating me based on merely crime stats as opposed to how well I'm engaging the community and what all I'm dealing with, then it's a conflict. It's like, okay, do I do what they tell me to do, or do I do what they are evaluating me to do because I'm trying to have a successful career? So now, where do I put those funds? Where would, in you all's various communities, where is it that you would like to have the funds placed? Because if it's dealing with the schools, as you see with everything that's happening in the schools, do you want more police officers in schools? And now that's an interesting question because now you could have individuals that are placed in schools, but they're looking at more of it as a police officer as opposed to a school resource officer who's basically there to be a resource for the school, build engagement, build connection, build bridges, and help the kids matriculate and have a strong figure of law enforcement there. Because in some communities, law enforcement is exactly literally what the name says. The only time that they see someone in uniform is when we're coming to enforce the law. And so now, what do we do to change that in certain communities? Because also we've dealt with the subject of over policing. And it's kind of interesting because even in my research, when I dealt with it, I interviewed 17 black males that had experience in law enforcement. And we were talking about the various things in law enforcement. And we talk about racial profiling and we talk about Black Lives Matter. In today's society, we have been talking more about Black Lives Matter, dealing from a standpoint of them killing blacks. But there's another side of it from a HR standpoint, because if blacks are receiving tickets and or arrests, that is not helping their career progression. So we have to look at it and see what we're dealing with. So now when we're looking, saying, how is it that we wait until things get too far gone before we start trying to address them? And right now, as the saying goes, we are dealing more now with the symptoms of everything that has been happening over hundreds of years, as opposed to dealing with the root cause of the problem. For instance, studies will show you now by arresting a whole bunch of individuals does not necessarily get down your crime in an area. The things that get down crime in areas when you've engaged the community, you've engaged the public, you're utilizing your resources and their resources, and you're working in partnership. That is what you do to get down increases in crime. So now, the things that I look at right now, when I'm looking at a budget, I don't know whether you all have actually looked at your city's budgets and what's happened since this COVID has happened, because even right before COVID, our budgets were taking a hit. COVID came over and there are even more cuts happening. We're looking at right now, we're looking at these record numbers of unemployment. We're looking at on the unemployment, we're also looking at how many people are really needing things right now. So right now in the police department, that's the same things that are hitting. I see Dale Blackwood, I appreciate your comment. My brother, you were in one of my classes up in the northern part of Florida. Hopefully things are going well. That's one of our military vets who was a helicopter pilot. Then I see my coach, Dr. Tracy Timberlake. Glad that you were able to join us. I am a public servant. I don't think I will be running for office. No one has to worry about that. And I see Nadia Assad, who is running for office, has a question that some individuals are saying that they won't support a candidate if they're not in a favor of police defunding. What are my thoughts on that? It's interesting when individuals say that they aren't supporting individuals for a particular slogan. I will refer to defunding as a slogan because I believe that it is a phrase that tends to polarize our community, because if you're not really familiar with budgeting and how budgets actually work, and you hear defunding, the opposite of defunding would be funding. But I look at that as kind of like defrosting your windows. There's the opposite of defrosting, frosting. And I believe that there is a sliding scale on here as to what it would actually mean to defund or to reallocate the resources. But before you can reallocate the resources, first you must complete the census to make sure you have some resources to allocate. And now you have to be a part of the process so that therefore you can be in there to reallocate the funds that you have. And I guess that's the biggest problem that I have is that many individuals that I talk to have not been engaged for whatever reason. It could be you're too busy, could be you didn't know who to contact, it could be any number of reasons, but you have not gotten engaged. It's just like when you don't vote, then you really have no say. And I'll lay that over some procedural justice issues and procedural justice philosophies that we have in law enforcement that came out under President Obama so that you can see what those things would do where you can follow the actual procedures. Okay, and okay, Dale Blackwood says, when I was a community-oriented police officer, we only had 4 officers that were primarily assigned to a predominantly black neighborhood. That's interesting because just so you know, Dale Blackwood is a white male. We took money that was allocated to us to build more playgrounds, churches, and had to get-togethers to bring all of us together to get the drugs out of the neighborhood. We're and our brothers and sisters in that neighborhood that joined together and made it a safer neighborhood. It does work. That is what I'm talking about, Dale. And this is the thing that I look at where I understand that race does play an issue in the things that we're discussing, but I can tell you that it's not the issue. When you look at it, you have individuals, professional officers, and the thing that Dale probably didn't state that many times they took money out of their own pockets because the police department would not fund that. It's just like when I did my study, there are some African Americans that when they put in to go to classes that were basically community oriented policing classes, many times people were asked, why do you want to go to that? We don't need that class. So therefore, the police department was reallocating which training they were sending individuals to. So that's what we do when we're going out there. We have to see what is it that we're wanting to do. And this is the thing that I like to do as I'm in charge of a community oriented policing unit. And if you've ever noticed with some organizations, when an officer has had some issues or they are dealing with things, they might say, okay, well, you can go over to the schools or you can go over and work community oriented policing because people don't fully understand what it is. How many of y'all have ever gone to a community meeting and you know you're there for engagement, but when you go there, some people are just standing around the side and they think that attending is the same thing as engaging in the meeting? That bothers me because people in the community can tell whether or not you know them, like them, and trust them, or whether or not you're just there because somebody sent you by to be at a meeting. So as we're reallocating the funding, it'll be very interesting because how do you really allocate the funding and guarantee that the people that are doing the job want to do the job? If you've ever noticed, and this for my law enforcement friends, can you all imagine if there's someone on K9 or SWAT that acts less than enthusiastic? How long do you think that they would stay on the team versus someone that may be assigned to a community oriented policing unit? If they aren't up to par, they aren't really engaging, what's the likelihood of them staying on that team? Because most times people don't fully understand or grasp or really see the impact of what happens when you have a fully engaged police department, a fully engaged unit. And I'll tell you this, your most successful officers are the ones that have the best connection with the public. We had officers down here, I can tell you, you can name a couple names within your jurisdiction and people can tell you how connected they are. We had an individual, Goofy, that was a detective. If Goofy said something was happening out there, you could bet it was because he had basically built up such a connection with the community would let him know when guys were out and when they were doing things, and the bad guys knew him and had a relationship with him. Curcio, you have those kind of individuals that are out there. Individuals know them. They've built relationships in the community because they've been professional. When they had to take people to jail, they took people to jail. They understood people's humanity, but they did their jobs and they were professional. And the funny thing about it is individuals that have committed a crime, they will respect you if you are a professional. I've been out here 27 years and I've had some interesting run-ins with individuals on the street. But the problem that we're having in law enforcement reminds me about, like some people say, if we don't fund it with the military equipment, then they won't have that and they won't use it. I'm one of those that I believe that There is not an absolute right or wrong. It's somewhere in between on a continuum. I would hate to see it to where we actually needed the military type equipment, the SWAT type of equipment, the high capacity magazines, the various Humvees that we have. It's not what you have, it's how do you use them. And so now, can you imagine needing to have that equipment and not having it? And I'm sure that every agency does not use it the same way. And I'm sure that agencies that I've been a part of could improve how we use it. And that's why I'm always telling the community, we don't know everything. Can you engage with us? Can you come and talk with us? Invite us out to talk with you so that we can find out what it is that we need so that we can work these things out together. Because in our community, I believe the best triangle that we could have is if we have law enforcement, our education, and our community working together in that triangle. I believe that we can really move our community forward. Because one of the things we look at also in terms of our funding, one of the things that we're funded on is our housing values and your taxes and your millage rates. Let's look at it. If you have a high crime rate, let's suppose you buy your house for $200,000. Crime goes up around your house. So therefore now your house is only worth $100,000. Millage rate stays the same. That means the taxes in your community are going down, which means you're going to have less funds to fund, defund, or reallocate because the crime rate is going up. But now, if the crime rate goes down, your $200,000 house now goes up to $300,000. Your millage rate stays the same. Now you have more money in your community. You've elected individuals that can be fiduciaries and be very responsible with the funds, find out what the community is needing, and then you can get more funds to help more things in your community. That's why you have a tremendous gap in services that are provided in some communities. Some communities are completing their censuses and getting more of their allocated funding. Their housing values are going up, so their millage rate stays the same, but because their housing values are going up, they're getting more money in their coffers. Where others, they're having the crime go up. They're talking about what the police is or is not doing. So the crime goes up, the property values go down. So therefore, their millage rate has to go up or it stays the same and their resources goes down. It is a very interesting conversation that we have here when we're talking about budgets. But if we as a community do not get engaged, do not find out what's in the process, do not get over there and begin asking questions, then what are we doing? And it's kind of like a lot of people that are sitting on the sidelines. They'll have these conversations. Yes, defund the police department, get rid of the police. Okay, we get rid of the police. We say we have a new model of public safety. What new model of public safety are you going to also, with this new model of public safety, make sure you have a new model of criminality? Because if we have certain things that are going on in the criminal element, we must be able to address those from a police department public safety standpoint. And so I do believe we can have some conversations. I do believe we can have some reallocation of funding, but we must, one, be engaged in the process and find out what it is and not just yell out slogans like defunding the police. To me, it's very similar to Black Lives Matter. Sometimes people are saying Black Lives Matter too as a philosophy stating that, yes, those lives of black males that look like me, we do value also. Others are saying with the organization, Black Lives Matter is what they're talking about. So we have to be careful when we're having these conversations. Are we talking about the Black Lives Matter organization or are we talking about the Black Lives Matter philosophy? Because I believe a lot of times people are talking about philosophies and sometimes they're talking about the organization because these are the things that we need to understand. It's kind of like anytime you say something, you need to define what it is that you're talking about. So James Booth, another good alpha brother of mine from Florida A&M, defunding the police has become a polarizing political issue. I agree with your prospect. How do we educate those who seek understanding on how we can better prioritize resource allocation? Brother Booth, what I would tell you is right now in your jurisdiction, I would tell you to Google your police department, look at what their annual budget was for last year. You look at it. And now remember, that's the basic budget that they're having. You must also remember their off budget items also. So there may be grants that the police department is getting and they're seeking. Are they seeking grants for things that would be buying more equipment? Is your agency one that needs more equipment? So therefore their grants may be warranted in needing more equipment to make sure the officers have what they need to go out and serve the community. Also, are there being grants that are done to to help increase the funding for your community-oriented efforts, because that is something you would have to look at in your community. But you have to start at the books. The information is public information. You can do that. Then the other thing is you can ask and see how your law enforcement trust funds being spent. Those things are there. So let's talk about it. And anytime anyone has anything they want to ask me specifically, we can definitely have a conversation. We can definitely deal with this. I have no problems whatsoever. Also, for other resources, you can look out there. You can Google the International Association of Chiefs of Police. As an international organization, it deals with policing. See what their stance is on this. You can also Google the Police Research Forum. If anyone's typing those in there, they can type those in. It's Police Research Forum, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. You also have the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. So this will give you some viewpoints from individuals that are in the profession, that are looking at things, and you can begin asking them, what do we do? Because the biggest fear that I have is individuals get caught on a term of defunding the police. And I guess if some conspiracy theorists that may be saying, let's look at this. If we just have a lot of individuals that are felons that have gotten their right to vote back, and now you're having someone stating defund the police, if you are someone who has been convicted of a crime and it wasn't right, and now you've worked with the Innocence Project and they found out there were some errors in your Just Us or justice process, and you can get all of those individuals that were done wrong to vote now for whoever is supporting defund the police, you could have a large voting bloc. So is this slogan really out there to help other individuals, or what is this slogan of defunding all about? Google defunding the police. Look and see, there's some articles on CNN, and you'll begin to see what individuals are talking about. And you need to get the facts for yourself. Talk to individuals. Look at your individual city. Just like we say when you're voting, many times individuals will vote on the presidential election or on the big ones, and you have the electoral colleges that come into play there, and we tend not to vote on our local election. Right now, when you're talking about defunding the police, nothing on the national level is going to be dealing with what you do in your local and county government about your policing matter. So have you ever dealt with those? Have you talked with them? Have you looked at it to see, are they funding things the way that you wish to have them funded? And this is where you start looking at socioeconomic differences, because if you look in certain communities, the gated communities that have those large voting blocks, they tend not to have as many issues with policing as some of the other ones. I see a question here, Bridget Miller. If you defund the police, who's going to do the policing? That does not make sense. Correction, consequences and proper training, not defunding. Racism, police brutality, and misuse of authority is taught or learned. Drive and weed out those tainted officers and move forward with purpose. All lives matter. I agree with what you're stating there, Ms. Miller, when you talk about it, but it's kind of interesting. When you talk about the proper training and you talk about systemic things that are happening in our society, one, let's look at, how does police officers get trained? One, police law enforcement is a white male dominated career field. And most of us make our character a lot of time is based on our lived experiences. Our lived experiences make up who we are. And just like when they say dealing with diversity, I've dealt with some individuals that look at diversity, but is diversity a picture on a wall, or is diversity a difference of mindset of individuals that work with your organization? Different people have different views, and I do strongly believe that representation is a must, but there are different types of philosophies that have same skin tones. And when you talk about proper training, to be an instructor in law enforcement, one, to teach at the academy, and I know Mr. Boyer could sound these off and others, but to be an instructor in law enforcement, one, you must be in law enforcement, and most times you're going to be sworn as a police officer, corrections officer, probationary officer. You've been in the job for a while. You have gone out and taken the instructor techniques or developed some area of expertise. You have been able to network to get into the closed network of the teachers that are either at the Institute of Public Safety or your criminal justice places, and you've been able to get into those areas. So now you look at it, how do you get the training? You have to put it in at your particular police department, work your way through. So now systemically, think about it. Birds of a feather flock together. They say it's not what you know, it's who you know. So therefore, if you get into a law enforcement job and you don't know the people at the police academy or know someone there, it is very difficult to get in. And when I train, we all train based on our life experiences. And our life experiences are not going to be the same as everyone else's. That's why it is key to make sure that you have a diverse teaching core so that therefore you can have a diversity of viewpoints as individuals come through the training. We don't want people to be monolithic and only know one particular thing because we deal with multiple communities. And I was able to get out at the Institute because I was working on my master's degree, and the person that was out there at the academy was in my master's class, and it turned out someone didn't show up for to teach an ethics class, and I just got my ethics teaching certification. So one, you have to be prepared for the opportunity because you often hear people say that they're lucky. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity, and I was connected, so therefore I was able to get the opportunity. And once I showed up, I had to perform. So as we're teaching officers, we go through and we have to teach them. How do we teach them? What do we teach them? For instance, what is suspicious? What's suspicious to you may not be suspicious to me. So I do agree that we have the proper training. We have to have accountability to get through things. This is what we're actually looking for. All right, Dale, I see one you have down here. You said, let me see here. Take a weed infested piece of land and turn it into a playground, a church, or a patio to barbecue with children and adults have and adults who have been so afraid to leave their homes because of drugs and gangs, and you'll indeed be blessed as we were. It's very interesting you say that also, my brother, because if you look at it in our community, the individuals that sell drugs and do illegal activities many times have the barbecues or do backpack giveaways in the neighborhood, and that's how they earn their political clout in the neighborhood. They have basically reallocated funds or defunded some other things to fund things for the kids. Even those guys that are running illegal businesses understand the importance of having the youth taken care of. So they'll go out and do those. So this is what we're looking to do. I'm really enjoying this. Which other questions do you all have? I'd love to answer any of those that you all post up, because what I want us to do is definitely go out there and deal with some of these things. And one of the things I look at also when you're talking about defunding the police department, look at your police departments, talk at your police leadership, find out how many positions they have changed from a sworn position to civilian positions, changed from police officers to others. For instance, at my agency, we have civilianized background investigators. Before we had police officers in those positions. Now they're civilian positions. We've had crime scene individuals that were police officers. Now they are largely civilian. We've had other positions that have been police officers. Now they have been civilianized. That is one way that we're reallocating funds, not defunding, but reallocating. So we're dealing with those. And then the other one that we look at is when we are actually looking at the defunding and the reallocation. I want you all to go out to your communities. You know who the key people are in your communities. You need to make sure that within your organizations, I'm in Alpha Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, we need to be more engaged. We'll go out there, we'll talk about voting. We say a voteless people is a hopeless people, but we also need to make sure that our community is educated. And when we're talking also, I've talked with some political individuals, and when I spoke with Nadia Assad, she was talking about how do we reach individuals in our community that perhaps do not have the benefit of having internet, perhaps do not have the benefit of having being on this live feed. How do we get them the information that they need to join us and have the information that we need? And many times the individuals that are most impacted are the ones that are not really, we don't hear their voice. And with that in mind, I want to give you what we talk about procedural justice. And you can also Google procedural justice, because procedural justice by its nature is one thing that came up under the Obama administration, and it deals with, is the procedure fair? Because most times when individuals have an encounter with law enforcement, they aren't so much upset about the process, because some individuals have not gotten a ticket, but it was the chastisement, the tone and tenor of the officer that ticked them off more than not getting a ticket. They would have rather gotten a ticket. But one of those tenets is transparency. Are you transparent with what's happening? And that's what happens a lot of times with budgets. Are the budgets really transparent? Are we having the hearings? Do we really understand them? Another tenet of it is voice. So have we given the community voice in our budget process? Has the community even offered their voice? Because many times cities and police departments will ask for your input, but for whatever reason, we do not give the input for what it is that we're wanting. Some police departments have even gone out and started soliciting public input on hiring and promotional processes and candidates. Because once you start dealing with voice, transparency, and you start being that you are impartial, because in many neighborhoods, have you noticed that sometimes the neighborhoods that tend to be on a higher socioeconomic level may tend to get more attention or seems to get more of the resources that they want than the communities that do not have the socioeconomic resources? So what are we doing to level that playing field? What are we doing to reallocate those budgets to make sure that we get it? And just as me on my job, sometimes I've gone in some communities that have not needed proactive policing, and they're saying, how come we don't see the police as much? And it's kind of funny to me because I'm like, that should be a good thing. You don't see us as much. But this is where I get into the defunding of policing and what is going on in each specific community, because each specific community has various different needs. So while one can deal with defunding, one may need to deal with reallocation. Because in some communities, if they say we aren't having that much crime, but we just like to see the police, we pay taxes also. So now you have to have that ability to meet the needs of those individuals that pay taxes and want to see the police department and see the officers out there in the neighborhood, to those that are having a higher crime rate that need to have the policing going on in there, but they also don't want to become victims of bad policing because the police officers are in their neighborhood more than they're over in others, and that's increased their percentage or the likelihood of them having an encounter with law enforcement to receive a ticket and or be arrested. And then when they go to get a job, they are having that ticket and or arrest on their record just merely because of where they lived, which now we're dealing with economic issues on their job. So when we're looking at this in the reallocation in that particular sense, can you imagine if we would have reallocated funds to where we had more social services, perhaps we had more games for the youth to deal with, we had more organized sports for the kids to deal with? Because as all of us know, anytime we were in high school and there was a young man that played on any of the sports teams, anytime they were acting up, the words that they did not want to hear is, I'm going to tell coach. Because coach was that father figure, coach was that influencer, and coach had things there. So therefore, in the schools, what they had basically done, they didn't get rid of discipline. They didn't take discipline out of the schools. They basically reallocated it to the coaches. So right now in our communities, as we're looking at this, I'm looking to see if we have any other questions or comments that you would like for me to address while we're on here tonight. We have a few minutes. Okay. Right now, education. Oh, and one thing that I'll tell you, Nadia, is that when we're talking about education, many times individuals think that we're talking about their college degrees, their bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. That is not the education that I am referring to when we're talking about our community. Even when I was in college, my biggest education happened outside of the classroom. But right now, the information that we're talking about is education. We need to make sure that our community is aware that they have a role in how our funds and our municipalities are spent. Have you looked over there and made sure that your city officials are being held accountable for how they are spending our money? Look at your budgets and see where they are. Look at it and see what percentage of the money is going everywhere. Don't get thrown off by the whole numbers. It could be millions of dollars, and sometimes millions and commas can throw you off. Look at it on a percentage basis. Kind of like if I looked at each of you all's budget and I looked at what percent was spent on entertainment, percent was spent on food, what percent was spent on personal development, I could tell what is most important to you. The city budgets are the same way. Look and see where the percentages of their money are spent and see if it is in line with what the community wants. Ooh, correction, not the community wants, what the engaged community wants. Because if you're in the community and not engaged, your ideas will not be reflected in the budget. So, Pam Aiken, you said, please share my thoughts if I could implement 3 changes in high-risk communities. When I define a high-risk community, I will define a high-risk community as a community that has a high level of part one, or your violent crimes, your robberies, your perhaps homicides, your aggravated batteries, and that type thing. One thing I would do is I would go over there, and one thing that I would look at is CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. When you start looking at CPTED, that deals with what type of lighting do we have? What are the bushes like in the area? What are things like over there? Because many times you can just change the design of an area and it makes it less likely for individuals to commit crimes. Then I would also begin looking at what things are out there in the market that could help us. I know that a lot of police departments are using the Ring telephone doorbells, which has the video on them. And when you have a whole neighborhood with videos, if I might not catch it on my camera, you might catch it on a camera at your house. And when we put it together with our detectives, then that could work. And then the third one that I would always recommend is make sure that you are in touch with your police department. Because when you say high risk communities, I have found out that some areas are high risk to the community, but the community has not reported the crimes and reported what's happening. So from a police department standpoint, it's not a high risk. So if there are things going on in your police department, you must, and your community, you must report it to the police department so that we can take the appropriate action. So one, get engaged with that police department. Two, go over there, look at the CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, and then get engaged. We can make some things happen. Thanks for your question, Pam. Then James Booth, can you say our communities need respectable law enforcement? Local law enforcement is under the microscope due to recent events. What are your thoughts on ensuring that we police are held accountable for rogue behavior? I can tell you that one thing to help ensure that police are accountable for rogue behavior is to develop a process. If you see something that police officers are doing outstanding, send the police chief an email. If you see something a police officer is doing that is not outstanding, send the police chief an email. Because what happens is when people know that they will be recognized for good and or bad, then people will respond accordingly. But what happens so many times is the public is not engaged. They're not letting the police department know. And as a police executive, if I don't know what's going on with my officers, I cannot address it. So we can start out there. Also, you can begin taking part in what many of them have as citizens police academies, where they bring the civilians in to the community, introduce them to the police department. You do that. And kind of like they say, break bread with them, invite them to your homeowners meeting, invite them to your fraternity meetings, invite them to your sorority meetings, invite them to Links, your Masonic orders, your Eastern Star, invite your police departments out there, your Kiwanis, invite the police departments out to engage with, not just meet and sit on a panel, answer a few questions and leave. Let's talk, let's get to know each other. So I appreciate that question. All righty, which other ones do I have? And Dale, I appreciate the great words. I try to really help others to get to that next level. Like I say, my life motto is if I can help somebody as I pass along the way, my living will not be in vain. So I'm glad I've been able to add to you, my brother, and hope things are going well. And like I say, we appreciate all those years you did as a helicopter pilot out there for us in the military. Okay. Oh, okay, Pam. Now, Pam, when you talk about those 24-hour corner stores, now the 24-hour corner store is a very interesting phenomenon, because if you've ever noticed with the 24-hour corner stores, they have video cameras, but they never seem to be working when we want to. So now when you look at the other thing, this is what I say when you engage with the police department. Pam, just dealing with the 24-hour corner store, if I'm in law enforcement, I believe there's a problem going on at the 24-hour corner store, there are other resources I can bring into play. Let's suppose I bring into play code enforcement. So there might be things I can't do from law enforcement, but code enforcement may be able to go in and do things. I've also run it when we've dealt with individuals that were selling drugs out there, and we had some enterprises where you can start building those things together, and we have a couple people going there. Bring in the Internal Revenue Service, because the Internal Revenue Service can cut down some businesses rather quickly. So we have a lot of things that we can do once we talk to each other, put our minds together, and see what is it that we're trying to do to get ahead. But again, when you're talking about it, is that defunding? Because right now, think about how many corner stores we have. Think about how many schools we have. For instance, if we wanted to put a school resource officer in every school, can you imagine the amount of resources that that would take? That would be inundating the police department. But now let's also look at it. The same discussions that we're having in law enforcement can be paralleled, as I stated, in education. Think about it. How many teachers would like to have additional resources? Can you imagine if all teachers had to do was teach and they didn't have to deal with behavior problems in the classroom? They didn't have to deal with rude parents. They didn't have to go to other meetings that took them out of the classroom. Imagine what that would do for our kids. They would be able to do things. So when we talk about defunding, reallocating, I would like to look at it while we're looking at it tonight in the specific area of law enforcement. I want us to fully engage our law enforcement departments. I want our law enforcement departments to fully engage with our communities, because when we work together, we can help our whole community move forward. Any other questions y'all would like for me to deal with? Yes, indeed, the 2020 census, you best do that so that you can make sure at least you have some. It's kind of funny to me. If we don't fill out our 2020 census, we won't have the resources we need to defund. We will be automatically defunded because we don't have the resources. And remember, when you do the census, if you underreport now and your community continues growing, the next time you're going to be able to address it is 10 years down the road. So you are basically underfunded now and are guaranteeing that you're going to be underfunded for the next 10 years. So think about that. And one other thing I wanted to tell you all is that when we are looking at the defunding, and we're also looking at the impact of these protests, let's make sure that we are giving the right credit to the organizations that are creating the disruption. I've worked a few of the protests, and I know that I've worked some of them down here with the Black Lives Matter. They've come through, and I know Jasmine Rogers Shaw, she's running for office, and she is head of the group. I can tell you they had probably 1,500, 2,000 people that were protesting in the city of Fort Lauderdale. They came by the police department. They made sure nothing happened at the police department, didn't let anybody break the glass, do anything, and they cleaned up afterwards. It was after the event was over and you had other individuals that were there that came through and started doing things that were illegal. And then the Black Lives Matter group gets tainted with that. Just like down in the city of Miami, you go down there and you see the cars that were being destroyed and this type of stuff, the city of Miami police cars, and you see people spray painting on the cars Black Lives Matter, but the skin color of those individuals was that of Europeans, unless they were from South Africa and they were spray painting Black Lives Matter. So Google and watch and see the individuals that are being arrested, because I hate when we begin to taint the name of an organization or group of individuals because individuals have inserted themselves into the process. And that's what we're looking at in some of these particular instances. Okay. All right. And Ms. Doman, I see that you're there. Glad you were able to join us as you're doing your thing down in Miami. Okay. I can take a few more questions if we have any that I'd like to deal with, because I want us to understand my challenge for each of you all that's listening to this is to look at your police department's budgets, look at your city budgets, your county budgets, see where their money is being spent, attend some of their budget meetings, attend some of the city council meetings, go there with your groups, go there with your organization. Use this as a time to educate your community. It's very, very good time to educate. This time
Had a little technical difficulty there. Thank you for staying with me. Um, I saw that Robert Gaddy, you asked, had I spoken to the situation in Seattle? Seattle. Talk to me about which specific deal you'd like me to address in that one, Brother Gaddy. And then you've also seen where some police officers are walking off of the job. That one is a very tough one, and you're looking at it from a police standpoint. You're wondering what are the things that are protecting you? How is it that we go out there and do our job? There are a lot of issues that we need to definitely address as police officers in our communities to see what it is that we have that are there. And then, yes, the sound and things left, and I came back in here. We try to make it happen. What I'll do is if we have any other questions or anything that we need to address, I'll definitely address them with you all. If you all put them in the comment section, I will reply. So I greatly appreciate it. And you all remember, as always, I'm Dr. Gregory Salters, and you all have just been seasoned for success. Tune in next time.